Hello again, ladies and gentlemen. Michael Matt for the Remnant Forum. I have some good news to bring to you tonight, and that has to do with the Fatima Center's Path to Peace conference, which just concluded a couple of days ago. Some of you may have been aware that there was quite a witch hunt that went underway in the media. It was inspired by the Southern Poverty Law Center, but a lot of other magazines and blogs and websites jumped on board. Why? Because Ron Paul was going to be the keynote speaker at that conference, and we're happy to now announce that although there was a lot of hype and a lot of hysteria coming from the Southern Poverty Law Center to try to intimidate Congressman Paul from being the keynote speaker, it didn't work. Congressman Paul brought down the House, thunderous standing ovation. No members of the press showed up. No protesters. The promised protesters never showed up. Chris Ferrara, what do you think? It was kind of a non-event in that respect, wasn't it?
Well, when the hysteria was over, they didn't show up because they know we're not anti-Semites. The purpose of the charge is to discredit your target. There's no evidence to support it. This is how the Southern Poverty Law Center operates. It's a hate group collector. It needs hate groups because it uses hate groups to raise funds. And the idea is to denounce someone as a hate group, not to prove that anyone is actually guilty of hating. And that's what they've done with traditional Catholics.
It struck me. It was just, I thought it was really a great thing. In a way, Father Gruner and the Fatima Center have really done us a favor because the fact that they stuck to this, despite this media, swell of sort of hate mongering against them, and the fact that Congressman Paul came in anyway, basically disregarded the whole campaign, and then most importantly of all, the fact that no press even showed up for this conference that they had said, the far-left media had billed as being arranged by the most dangerous and powerful anti-Semites in North America. Chris, this is the end of the story. I mean, the bubble just popped. Obviously, nobody in the media up there, the far-left media, truly believed the Southern Poverty Law Center's allegations. It's a witch hunt, and now that what happened at the Fatima conference is proof positive. It's over. They don't have any evidence. They don't have any real charges. It's simply a lot of hate mongering and a witch hunt.
Well, the most successful hate group in the country is the Southern Poverty Law Center. They're filled with hate for anybody that disagrees with them. That hate map that they put out is an expression of their hatred for people who cling to the remnants of the Christian moral order in our country. That's what the hate map is.
That's right.
It's who they hate.
That's right.
Joe Sobran, respecting the charge of anti-Semitism, once said something along the lines of, anti-Semite used to mean someone who hates Jews. Now it means someone that certain Jews hate. That's what anti-Semitism is.
Right.
The charge is possible to refute. If you deny that you're an anti-Semite, they say you're covering up your anti-Semitism. If you point out that you've worked with Jews and Jewish spokesmen of various kinds on social issues, well, you're just covering up your anti-Semitism. If you speak about the Masonic conspiracy that the popes have condemned at least 200 times in papal pronouncements, more than any other threat to the church, they've condemned Freemasonry, then the answer is, well, you mean the Jews when you speak of Masons, so you're an anti-Semite. If you cite a Jewish source who agrees with you on a particular social issue, then they say, well, he's a self-hating Jew, so you're an anti-Semite. It's impossible to avoid the charge. But I find it interesting that no less than Alan Dershowitz, one of the most prominent Jewish spokesmen in America, a brilliant appellate attorney, has made it clear what we have always said, that anti-Semitism does not involve criticism, for example, of policies of the Israeli nation state, or even the ideology of Zionism. We have every right to criticize these things. And I think it might be helpful if you played that clip for the viewers right now.
Yeah, let's do it. Let's take a look.
It's good to be critical of Israel. Many Israelis are critical of Israeli policies. Many Israelis are anti-Zionist even. I have no problem with people challenging and critiquing Zionism, Israeli policies. I would never call a person who merely did that anti-Semitic.
Yeah, that's very useful, Chris. And I guess this kind of helps to explain. I mean, that this charge of anti-Semitism, it's so unfounded. We reject it out of hand again and again and again. And I guess we need to throw in there a little bit of a point that this is why we've been so upset with folks like Catholic Answers Live right in that original Southern Poverty Law Center hatchet piece called The Radical Traditionalist, she cites Crisis Magazine. She cites Sandra Meisel and the whole anti-traditionalist harangue. So yeah, this is serious stuff, and we have a right, I think, and a duty to stand up and say we reject the charge and we resent fellow Catholics leveling it against us.
Well, we've done a couple of shows on this, and I guess this will round out the trilogy. But the accusation of anti-Semitism wielded by our fellow Catholics against us has a polemical purpose. They don't really think that we're anti-Semites any more than the left-wing press that failed to show up in Canada thinks we're anti-Semites. What they really want to do is use the charge to discredit the Roman Catholic traditionalist movement, which seeks a restoration of the church, beginning with the liturgy, to rescue the church from the worst crisis in her history. Carl Keating spoke of hyperbolic traditionalists in a recent blog post. Is he serious? What could be more hyperbolic than Paul VI's statement that the smoke of Satan had entered the church after the council and that the church was engaged in a process of auto-demolition? What could be more hyperbolic than the observation of Cardinal Ratzinger, who became Benedict XVI, that after the council the church underwent a continuing process of decay and witnessed the unprecedented collapse of the liturgy? When John Paul II spoke of silent apostasy throughout the Western world, was that hyperbole? When Pope Benedict XVI said that in vast areas of the church the faith is in danger of dying out like a flame that is not being fed, was he indulging in hyperbole? These people who fling the charge of anti-Semitism at their fellow Catholics, who call us hyperbolic, are engaged in a massive cover-up. Mike Voris, on his show, has done admirable work in exposing this cover-up. They're pretending that the church is not in the midst of the worst crisis in history. And since we're the ones that are pointing this out on a consistent basis, they have to discredit us. That's what the empty charge of anti-Semitism is all about.
No, that's right, and it's such a shame to see someone like Congressman Ron Paul, he's not a Catholic, he's just a decent fellow who I think is still pretty stunned that he ever even won an election in this country. He's just out there trying to do the right thing. He looks at the same charge of anti-Semitism leveled against traditional Catholics. He's on MSNBC, and Chris, what does he call it? He calls it Catholic bashing, and that's exactly what it is. So I feel really. I think it's really unfortunate that guys like Pat Coffin and Tim Staples and Carl Keating are throwing this around, Chris. These guys are apologists. If one thing they certainly do know, they know Scripture. And they know very well that the target here, as you suggest, the target here is Christian Scripture. The Bible, for some of these far left Jewish action groups, is anti-Semitic, Chris. And we saw this with the Gibson film. So, it has to stop. Traditional Catholics have rejected it, have dismissed it, have defended themselves again and again, and yet it keeps getting trotted out. And now, as we're seeing, it's getting very serious, where we had a police presence at the Fatima Center's conference the whole time, because the police were not sure where this was going to go. The far left was using rhetoric that was hateful, and it evoked a response from the police, and the police were there the entire time. It's getting pretty dangerous.
We know what happened with the American Family Association, identified as a hate group by the Southern Poverty Law Center. Some lunatic located the association's headquarters on the hate map of the Southern Poverty Law Center, went in there and began squeezing off rounds inside the headquarters. He shot up the place. Yeah. And he later on admitted he got his lead from the Southern Poverty Law Center. And what's so bitterly ironic here is that Ron Paul didn't believe these charges of anti-Semitism directed against you and me and Father Gruner and other participants in the conference in Niagara Falls. He came ahead and attended it. He told the audience, I made a promise to be here, and here I am, because he objected to this kind of branding. But to see it being done to us by our fellow Catholics, that is a pill that is very hard to swallow.
No, that's right. That's right. We pointed out that the Council of Trent itself, and I'll put the quotation from, I think it's Article 4 of the Council, the Catechism of the Council of Trent, in which the constant teaching of the Church is reiterated, anti-Semitism is ruled out, racial hatred is ruled out, blaming certain groups, blaming the Jews. The Council of Trent says very clearly that all men put Christ on the cross, that our sins caused him to die on the cross. I mean, this is the teaching of the church. And so, when we see the far left actually using the Sandra Meisels, the Crisis magazines, the Catholic Answers as part of their polemic against a guy like Father Nicholas Gruner and his message of Our Lady of Fatima and peace, we really understand that this idea that they are water carriers for the left is not hyperbolic, but can be actually literally demonstrated in the articles written by Heidi Beirich of the Southern Poverty Law Center, etc.
Well, I hope this will conclude our ongoing discussion of the problem, which seems to be erupting anew every week. I mean, this is out of control. This internecine squabbling and hatred has to stop for the good of the church. We're not the problem. The problem is the state of the church after 50 years of disaster to innovator. And this idea of denouncing traditionalists masks the real agenda, and Mike Voris has exposed it very well over on his show. The agenda is to hide the reality of our situation.
No, that's exactly right. And I think, as you said earlier, they know that these charges are not really true, and we can't. Everyone knows that there's a sort of a prevailing instability, mental instability, coming kind of throughout most of society right now. We're a godless society. We're a secular society. The internet it's become a gag line or a punch line for comedians about the number of kooky, crazy people you see on the internet, Chris, and the ones that attach themselves like barnacles to the traditional movement. We don't pay them much attention, much less give it too much time tracking down their latest crazy theory. This is why we really have been trying to encourage our critics to look at the mainstream of the traditional Catholic movement. Let's have a serious face-to-face debate and discussion, and not look for the folks with the propeller beanies and the tinfoil hats on the internet saying outrageous things that no one cares about, Chris. I think it's possible to sort of separate whoever those people are from the mainstream traditionalists, of Fraternity of St. Peter, the Society of St. Pius X, the Remnant, the Angelus, Latin Mass magazine, and a lot of really legitimate blogs and like Rorate Cheli, a lot of legitimate blogs and websites that are not shy and are very forthcoming with what the traditionalist positions are.
Well, the views expressed by these websites, which are, for want of a better term, the mainstream of the traditionalist movement, were all within the rights of Catholics. I mean, the Code of Canon Law says we have every right to express our concern about problems in the church publicly through the means of social communication, and also to express our concerns to the sacred pastors of the church. Are some people who do this guilty of rhetorical excesses? Well, sure, but that's the way it is in public discourse. People do cross the line, but that's not traditionalism per se. And, they've got to stop trolling the comm boxes to look for a couple of nuts and really engage us on the issues.
That's
Go
right.
to the Remnant website, Keep the Faith, Latin Mass, Fraternity of St. Peter, the Angelus magazine. These are the core publications of the traditionalist movement today, and you won't find any of the nonsense in those publications. And by the way, this idea that traditionalists are conspiracy nuts. Are you kidding me? Alex Jones has a vast audience, which goes far beyond Roman Catholic traditionalists. Go to any typical new Mass parish, half of them probably watch Alex Jones. I've seen Nova Soto Catholics who think the moon landing in 1969 was put on in a sound stage somewhere in Los Angeles.
No, that's right.
And it's commonly believed by Catholics of the so-called mainstream, 9/11 was an inside job. That's not a traditionalist view. That's a view promoted by Alex Jones, who unites Catholics of all types and Protestants who are all addicted to conspiracy theories.
Yeah,
nothing to do with Roman traditionalism.
Nothing whatsoever, and we can not only point to that, but we can point out the sort of the pioneer core of the traditional Catholic. I mean, up at the Fatima Path to Peace conference, I gave a talk for 1 hour defending against this absurd charge of anti-Semitism, which of course is hatred, which is a mortal sin, which as Catholics we can't engage in whatsoever. But my father fought in World War II. My grandfather was fighting against Nazism. Dietrich von Hildebrand was named as the most dangerous person to the Third Reich. He's another one of our pioneers. Archbishop Lefebvre his own father died in a concentration camp, and you just go down the line to expose the absurdity as far as mainstream traditional Catholicism and some of these ugly and horrible accusations.
Well, you're being too modest, because you gave a talk at the Fatima conference in Niagara Falls in which you deplored racial hatred of the Jews, gave examples of the church's teaching against racial hatred of the Jews. You even condemned Holocaust revisionism. You talked about how your father fought against the Nazis in World War II. And this conference, which was supposed to be a coven of anti-Semites, gave you an immediate standing ovation. That's what happened.
Yeah.
Among the coven of Satan, of Jew-hating traditionalists, not one of them was in his seat at the end of your speech. So much for that accusation.
No, that's right, and I'll take the compliment only in this.
By the way, you really gave a fantastic speech. I've never seen you in better form.
Well, I appreciate that, and I will accept it, but only because, again, your point is well taken. That the folks at this supposed anti-Semitic coven were so responsive. I stood there and felt almost embarrassed for about a minute, because they were appreciating the sentiments that the constant teaching of the church is to deplore this sort of thing, hatred of a group of folks because of their race, or denying the suffering of the Jewish people because of their race during World War II and so forth. It doesn't exist, Chris. It's a false charge. It's been rejected time and time again. But I go back to where we started with this program tonight, and that is the fact that the press did not show up at that conference, the fact that there were no protesters outside that conference, to me proves once and for all it's over. It's a witch hunt. There's no evidence. They're not even trying to have a negotiation or a face-to-face dialogue with us. By they, I mean the far left, the folks who are leveling these accusations. It's a lot of hot air. And if you stand up to them and say, nice try, but it's bogus, they disappear, Chris. They just evaporate. They don't show up. All they have is their little internet smear campaigns and hate-mongering.
Well, the problem is we find some of our fellow Catholics using the same tactic against their brethren within the Catholic Church. And I mean the conservative commentators that we've been mentioning in this broadcast and the previous two episodes. Now, this is lowly, this is despicable, and it has to stop. And I hope this is the last time we have to address this on the air like this. Really, fellows, cut it out.
Yeah. No, that's exactly right, and I think this is the last time I'm going to bring up this whole charge of anti-Semitism too. It's not real. It's smoke and mirrors, and I think we dignify it by again and again going back and trying to defend ourselves against silly and false charges that don't have really any meat anyway. Certainly, there's no actual evidence. There's just a lot of fluff, and so I agree with you. The neo-Catholics, there are folks in the middle, folks that we're begging to sort of come into the whole, the fight to against those who really hate the church, and to stand up and say things like you say, like Mike Voris. He's unpopular with some of those folks. Why? Because he stands up and speaks what's obvious to tens of thousands of American Catholics. That's why they don't like Mike Voris, because he's too outspoken. He's not politically correct enough. I think it's time for a lot of folks to abandon the political correct policy of appeasement with the folks that hate our church and hate our religion.
How many more people do they want to leave the church? I mean, the supposedly vibrant church of Latin America is hemorrhaging Catholics into the Protestant sects, where people feel that they're being fed. That's the tradition, the typical phrase that these people recite when they're asked why they left the church. I wasn't being fed. They don't even know that the Holy Eucharist is being confected on these altars in the Novus Ordo rite, because the rite has so de-emphasized the sacrament that the priest is confecting. They no longer believe in the real presence. So it comes down to the quality of preaching. They're getting horrifically bad preaching, feel-good sermons about nothing, mush. And so when some fundamentalist minister comes along and preaches about sin and redemption and heaven and hell, they defect in order to be fed. That's the problem in the church today, not the traditionalist movement, which is attempting to rectify that problem. So let's hope this is the end of it. You and I are off to a conference in West Virginia, not far from University of Steubenville, where, in one of the many positive signs, the Latin Mass has returned, and they actually have a Latin Mass Schola. That's the future of the church.
At Franciscan University. Yeah, it's terrific. Speaking of that, let's close on that tonight with this episode of the Remnant Forum. we're both going to be at this conference. And this conference, I think, will put our money where our mouth is, and that is that we're not interested in constantly defending ourselves against charges from neo-Catholics or the far left, indefinitely. We really want to move forward, as a lot of folks do. And this conference, which is going to happen next week, is a great example. Actually, it starts this Friday. This coming Friday is a great example of that. You got folks from LifeSite News will be there. You got folks from Michael Boris will be there. You'll be there. American Catholic Lawyers, the Roman Forum, the Angelus, Catholic Family News. A lot of great folks that share our desire to sort of come together and to recognize where we are in the timeline of history. That folks are really after the faith. They're after all things Catholic, and it's time for all of us, even if we don't agree on every issue, we can say the creed together and mean it. And it's time to go out there, Chris, and defend our church against these attacks. And that's what's going to happen there this weekend. I'll give you the last word, but I hope the folks will come to this conference and see how it works.
Last word is go to the Remnant website, click on the link for that conference, and sign up. There's plenty of time. It's starting this Friday, and it goes through Saturday and Sunday. And, we'll see you in West Virginia, just over the border from Pittsburgh, near Franciscan University of Steubenville.
That's right. It'll be a great time. Well, sounds good, Chris. We'll see you there.
Take care.
Keep the faith.